Last week was Easter. Together we gathered around the empty tomb. We, like John, Peter, and Mary, looked into an empty tomb and celebrated the resurrection of our Savior. We had this wonderful, I thought it was a wonderful service last week. But the question that I realized we didn't answer last week, and it's okay we didn't because I want to talk about it today, is how do we then live the resurrected life? If we look at Jesus and we know that His resurrection brings about redemption, salvation, and this idea of our salvation and righteousness with God, then how do I live the life that exemplifies what Jesus rose for? Because I think that when we look at our calling as Christians, it is to go beyond just sitting and acknowledging that Jesus rose from the grave. I mean, we could all sit and mentally understand and mentally say we believe in the resurrection, but that has to change how we live. And so I want us to spend today thinking about how that changes how we live. And there's no passage that probably exemplifies this better than John chapter 13. John 13 is a famous chapter. I'm going to say the section highlighter, the text, and you're going to know it immediately. It's Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And so as we come into John 13 today, I want you to think for a moment that this is Thursday night. Probably Thursday night, if Jesus is sitting with His disciples celebrating the Passover feast. And I want you to also know that the cross is within hours, within a day of this moment. We know that's the heart of Jesus. But to know that in that mental state, He does this. Let's open to John chapter 13. Let's just start with verse 1 for a moment. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for Him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved His own who were in the world, He loved them to the end. Maybe it's an old King James, or the way I memorized it was He loved them to the uttermost. That's the way it clicks in my mind. But I like the word love them to the end. Because Jesus in this moment is looking at, and this is meant to be the emotional open for the chapter. And so Jesus is looking at His disciples. He's sitting down to a meal, and I can imagine the chatter at the table. They're probably talking amongst themselves a little bit. They're talking about shared experiences. Maybe they're even arguing over who should be sitting closest to Jesus. Like a kid would say, I want to sit next to mom or dad. And they're arguing over these things. And Jesus is mentally watching, and He says, I love them to the end. That word uttermost, like I said, I mentioned it because it gives us the impression that He loved them to such a degree, and we know at this point that the cross is, like I said, it's 12, maybe 16 hours away from this moment. And to know that He says He loves them to the uttermost. He loves them completely because that is where He is going. But He loves them fully. He loves them with all of His being. And so we're given this insight as we start with verse 1. And I want to go now to verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under His power, and that He had come from God and was returning to God. I want you to notice here that the focus I see is this divine origin and this divine destination. Jesus says that He has come from the Father, but that He will be returning to the Father. at this point, you ever wonder, like, when did Jesus realize that he was the Son of God? Has that question ever entered your mind? Like, did he just come out of Mary being like, I'm the Son of God and I know this? I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. But this is one of those times when we do know exactly what Jesus was aware of. It says that he knew that he came from God and that he knows he's returning to God. Now let's go to verse 4 and 5. So Jesus got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. I want you to think for a moment about washing someone's feet. Crackly feet. You know, they're not nicely manicured feet, pedicured feet. They're crackles. There's cracks on them. There's funky toes. Luke has shared a story one time, and I'm going to share it. It's when Mike washed your feet. Because you've shared that, you said, look, I remember Mike washing my feet and how awkward it felt to be on the receiving end. Like, this is just, and this goes a little further because we think of it as this way, and it's like, oh, well, this is just a little awkward. And some of you are like, well, I go get pedicures. I'm a little used to that. Maybe you are, but when someone is washing your feet that you know that you're close to, and that it's not like a pedicure situation, it feels different. All of a sudden, the emotions are different, and it may even seem weird. But that's us. And by the way, my feet are clean. Like, I showered, and I do clean between my toes, and I put socks on and shoes on, and I think my feet, if I take them off, they're going to stink a little bit, but we're going to be okay. Like, it's not going to be bad. I want you to imagine a world, though, where everyone wore flip-flops, and not the best of flip-flop, mind you. And they're walking along with the donkeys and the camels, and they're walking along with their animals, and they're going to be going out in the field and taking care of their cows, and they're taking care of all these animals, and they're just walking in this stuff. And they come into the house, and unlike ours where you take your shoes off and you leave them by the door, it's coming in with them. And that's what's happening at this meal. They've come in with dirty feet. They're all sitting down now at the table. Can you imagine eating dinner with like cow poop on your feet? This is not a pleasant situation. So Jesus sees this. He gets up, he wraps himself with a towel, and he begins to wash their feet. There's this phrase in Jewish rules that goes like this. It says, Jewish legal tradition held that a Jewish slave wasn't even required to wash their master's feet. That was one level you could not do. Even a Jewish, now you could get a Gentile slave too, but you could not force your Jewish brother to do it. And then there was a rabbinic saying that says, a disciple may do this to his teacher, whatever a servant does for his master, except loosen his sandal. Foot washing was one of the lowest forms of society possible. And Jesus willingly walks into that. There's a couple of lessons that I want us to take away today. And the first lesson that I see is that greatness chooses to serve. Look at these first 5 verses, and you're going to see that the thing that we notice primarily in verses 3 and 4 is that Jesus is the one person in this room with full authority. He knew he came from God. He's going back to God. He has every right to say, hey, Judas, why don't you go ahead and wash everyone's feet? Oh, for those of you who know the story, he already knows that Judas is going to betray him. How easy would it have been to be like, hey, Judas, before you go off and do your dastardly deed, let's go ahead and wash feet for a moment here. He doesn't. Instead, he washes the feet. This is not the act of someone who doesn't know their own worth. Jesus knows that he is valuable. This is not some sort of self-esteem issue that Jesus is having, but it's this reality that his greatness was not the obstacle to his service. It was the reason for his service. Jesus chose to serve his because of his position in life. We learned this in Philippians chapter 2. For those of you who know the story of Philippians chapter 2, this is verses 5 and 6. It says, in your relationships with one another, Paul's comment here, he says, have the same mindset that which was also in Jesus Christ, who being in the very nature of God did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being made in human likeness. Being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself again to becoming obedient to the point of death, even the death of a cross. And so when we look at this account from Philippians, Paul is relaying what's happening in John 13, what's happening at the cross of Jesus, that Jesus humbled himself and that the person who had every right to be served came to serve others. There's a picture of Pope Francis I want to throw up on the screen. I think this is the one from 2013. The one I was looking for was the one from 2013. But it was 2013, Pope Francis went and washed the feet of 12 inmates at a juvenile detention center. And particularly, he wanted to make sure that there were at least 2 women and that there were 2 Muslims. He wanted to wash their feet. Now here's the man who leads the Catholic Church, one of the largest churches in the world, who has, at any given right, the ability to say, I'm not going to do that. But yet he chose to. Service. What does it look like when we choose to serve other people? You know what other person that I think of, and I want to use right now as an example, for service as a defining point, is Cynthia Bergen. Cynthia has every right. Is she even here? She's not even here. She's teaching. It's a perfect example then. Cynthia is one of those people, if you don't know her, you should get to meet her. Cynthia, I don't know how old she is. She's 29 years old. She's been 29 for a number of years. We'll leave her there. But Cynthia is one who just serves. Now, by the way, I'm picking on her today. I could pick on so many others, but she's one that, matter of fact, right now, she's one that could very easily say, you know what? I can't get down on the floor with these kids anymore. It's probably time for me to stop teaching. But she's in the classroom today. She's one that I know last summer when we were at camp, she came up and cooked in the kitchen, which I learned very quickly, cooking in the kitchen at camp is no joke. That is a full body workout. That is Pilates all day kind of stuff. And yet she would come up and work in the kitchen and she'd say, I'm not going to be as fast as some of you are, but I'm going to be here, and served. She's been a youth sponsor for a bajillion years. And yet again, it's a prime example. She could say, you know what? I don't understand these kids anymore. They speak a different language. And you know what? I want to help, but I just don't fit anymore. She could very easily say those things. But I guarantee you that never enters her mind. Because it's all, how can I help? What can I do? How can I bless other people? You know, we've seen leadership that's bad. We've seen leadership that's poor. And I can guarantee you that the poor leaders are the ones who would say, I'm not even going to pick up the cup of coffee that fell on the floor because it's not my job. Someone else is responsible for that. But Jesus shows up and he washes feet because he wants to set the example for what his disciples should follow. And this speaks to us. This calls us to account, to become someone who serves like Jesus does. Someone who lives with Christ to such a degree that we want to serve and we want to care for other people, that we want to be kind and compassionate. And what I learn in the simple teaching is that secure people serve and insecure people protect. You see, secure people can serve because they don't need to worry about what other people think of them. Will people think that I'm too low? Will people think that my hands are dirty? Will people think that? They don't need to worry about that because they know It's the insecure people who say, well, I've got to hold my position. I have to hold my power. I have to hold to these things. So Jesus chose to serve. But I notice if we move a little further in our text, verse 6 now, verses 6 through 8, Simon, he comes to Simon Peter, and he says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, do you not realize now what I am doing? But later you will understand. No, Peter says, you shall never wash my feet. I love Peter. I think we all love Peter. Because in some way we want to be like Peter. We want to be the one who stands up. We want to be the person who steps out of the water. We want to be the person who runs into the grave. And in this moment, it's like, I understand Peter. Because Peter will finish by saying, if you're going to wash my feet, just wash the whole part of me. I need to be cleansed. I appreciate that in Peter. And Jesus has this little turn where he says, you don't need a whole bath, Peter. You're clean. You just need your feet washed. But there are some people here, Judas, who need to be washed. You can feel that sense of tension and relief in this moment. But verse 8 says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Why do you think Jesus said that? Unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Now, something I did notice in this, and I'm going to ask you, we all kind of visualize these scenes in our life. Well, I'm going to ask you this first. Does someone have the correct time? Is that clock on the back wall right?
10:57.
It is right. We're going to run this up real quick. Okay. I want you to play this scene in your head for a moment, and you're looking at Peter. And Peter says, no, Jesus, don't wash my feet. But does Peter grab the towel from Jesus? Does Peter grab the wash bucket from Jesus? I'm thankful that I'm not the only one. That's not the way it played out. In my head, I see Peter sitting there saying, no, Jesus, don't do that. And Jesus is like, okay. And he's doing it. And Peter's like, oh, please stop. No. That's the way this plays out in my head. And I'm like, Peter, if you really meant it, if that was how you felt, then you would do something about this. And Peter doesn't. He allows to be received, which maybe that's the lesson to be taken from this. How many of us allow ourselves to receive the blessings from God? I don't know about you, but oftentimes I feel that I have to earn it. I feel like I have to work hard enough. I feel like I have to deserve it. And I feel like if I'm not doing something to be receptive of God's blessing, then how in the world can it be God's blessing? I have to do this. And I'm going to tell God, well, God, you can't do that. Don't do that. But in reality, there's no ability that I have to save me. There's no ability that I have to save you. I am truly 100% focused that I am lost without Jesus. And yet here in this passage, Peter receives the foot washing by Jesus. I want to say that this might be pride disguised as humility. I want to say that maybe Peter is, and maybe that's my internal reading, because maybe that's the problem I have. That maybe it's pride being disguised as humility. I'm like, oh no, I'll do that. Jesus, don't do that for me. I can handle it. And yet, I can't. I have to be receptive of the salvation that God provides, because that's the only way I am saved. That's the only way I'm cleansed. The same's true for you. The only way any of us are cleansed is purely by Jesus Christ. You can't work yourself. You can't save yourself. You can't clean yourself of the disgust that sticks to you called sin. But Jesus can. And Jesus does. Now, because Jesus does, this is what I want to come to in verses 12 through 17. But I want to focus on verses 12 through 15 first. Jesus finished washing their feet. He puts his clothes back on, he goes back to his seat, and then he says, "Do you understand what I've done for you?" And he asks them, "You call me teacher and you call me Lord, and you're right for that. But now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set you the example so that you do as I have done." I want you to focus on that for just a moment. You call me teacher and Lord. Jesus is saying, you understand my title. You understand my position. You understand that I'm the head honcho around here. You know it. You got it. But if I, as the head honcho, can bow my knees to you and can scrub your feet, he then says this, I have set the example for you to follow. I think this is a hard part for many Christians today to wrestle with. We all want to do good, do we not? But sometimes it becomes easier for us to just allow other people to do the good and for us to sit back and trust that somewhere it's getting done. I'm thinking of a conversation, when our Bible class, Mayo made this point, I think it was 2 weeks ago. We were talking about giving, and we were talking about how giving can involve our time. And that was when Mayo made this point. He said, for many people, it's easier to give money than it is to give time. We can always make more money, but it's hard to make more time because that's the one resource in life that there's only so much of it. And once it's gone, you're not getting it back. To think about serving other people, it takes time. It takes us being able and willing to stop what we want to do and what we perceive as important and to step into someone else's life to help them. And if your Lord and Savior set the example for you by doing that for His disciples and doing it to such a disgusting level for them, the question we have to ponder is, where do we step? What level do we need to step to? What foot washing do we need to do so that we can show the world what true leadership is like? I'm looking at Jesus and I'm realizing that the towel that He wrapped around Himself is not a towel of shame. It's the uniform of the Christian. That each and every one of us should have a towel wrapped around our waist in some way serving other people. And He says in verse 17, now you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So here's your challenge for the week, your homework. You ready? One towel, one person this week. What I want you to do is I want you to think of one person or situation in your life who needs something from you. A person or a situation that needs something from you. It's easy if this situation's been aware, because there's a good chance that most of you have seen situations where someone needs something and you just didn't step in. I want you to think of that situation, and before next Sunday, you have a timeline. Before next Sunday, I want you to put the towel on, figuratively, and I want you to go and serve in that area. That's your homework. So I don't know if it is a neighbor who's needed help and you've driven past. I don't know if it's a family member who's kind of been in this like Cold War situation with that other family member and they need someone to talk to. I want you to go there. Maybe it's a person at work who is drowning in the newness or whatever situation. I want you to go and help that person, and maybe it's someone right here in this auditorium who needs you because it's a hard season of life. Name the person, name the act, and do it. That's your homework. The blessing, I know, comes on the other side. Because something else I noticed in this passage is that Jesus didn't ask for His disciples, or He didn't wait for His disciples to ask. He just met the need. And so often, we're like, well, I will do it when they ask. That's a cop-out. I've done that. I know I have. That's a cop-out. Preaching to myself. If you see the need, fill the need. Jesus saw a need. He filled the need. And I'm very thankful today, last week we celebrated, but I'm very thankful today that He saw the need for my salvation. That was the need I could not fill. And that He solved that need for all of us. So in your own lives, we live the resurrection by doing what Jesus did. By dying to ourselves and living in His mission and His calling. And so that's going to happen by serving your neighbor. That's going to happen by surrendering your life to Him. And so maybe you're one this morning who needs to surrender. If there's a way that we can pray with you and walk with you through this, Brian Holt, I believe, has our prayer this morning. I'm going to go and invite Brian to pray. After that, if you need to talk to me privately, I'll be right over here. Would love the opportunity. Brian?